Sawadee Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today we're going to be studying the Pali Canon in English. This is our very first course where we're going to be exploring the words of the Buddha, which are the Pali Canon in English, because the Pali Canon is the original source, the most complete source that we have of Gotama Buddha's teachings. And there's several people over the years that have dedicated a lot of time, effort, and energy to learning Pali and then being able to translate that into English. And it's only been in fairly recent times that the Pali Canon in English has been accessible to the wider world. There's been various translations over the years, but now with technology like the internet and being able to ship things around the world, we are in a much different time and place than people were 100 or 200 years ago, where very few people around the world had heard anything about Gotama Buddha. Where now, with his teachings fully translated into English by many dedicated people, most of them monks, but also some household practitioners have also done a lot of translations as well. With all of these resources available to us, we can now actually study the Buddha's teachings in his own words. And because I've already been sharing the teachings of the Buddha through this book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Nibbana, students that have studied this should already have a nice foundation and a nice framework in which to understand the Buddha's teachings. Because the Pali Canon itself, it isn't laid out in any schematic format. There's not a beginning, middle, and end. It's just, here's all the teachings of the Buddha. And there's these 45 volumes of books that are very, very thick and big that people have been using and looking to as the source of Gotama Buddha's teachings. But without kind of a schematic and a framework in which to understand the teachings, students oftentimes are somewhat lost when they approach the Pali Canon as a first resource. So what I've been doing over the last year, but even before that, for the last year and a half, 2 years, I've been working on this book and then teaching it in various formats. And in the last 1 year, we've been doing online classes to help students build up their knowledge in this kind of structure and this system of Gotama Buddha's teachings, so that you understand that there's kind of a beginning, which is the 3 universal truths, the 4 noble truths, the Eightfold Path, the 5 precepts. There's the 3 poisons, the natural law of Dhamma, what is merit, and so forth and so on, that you've got this foundation and this structure. Because a lot of people think that the Pali Canon, there is just one source. But in reality, there's multiple sources of the Pali Canon itself, and then there's multiple translations of the Pali Canon. And then there's different teachers that have taken their interpretation of the Pali Canon. So what I'm offering in this program are some very high quality translations that have been assembled by a temple here in Thailand called Wat Na Pat Pong. This is a temple down in Bangkok that's really well known for its dedication to sharing the teachings of the Buddha in exactly the way that the Buddha shared them. So they've assembled this series of 13 books that will allow us to dive in and actually study and explore the Buddha's teachings in his own words. And if you've already got a framework of understanding the Buddha's teachings, these teachings with his own words will help you to kind of plug in and further illuminate this path to enlightenment. Because if you were just to approach the Pali Canon in these Buddha Vajana books, you could make some progress and you could understand the teachings, but without kind of having this framework and this schematic of understanding how the Buddha's teachings are laid out, what you should learn first, what you should learn second, and so forth and so on, it would be somewhat challenging. So that's why you have a teacher. A teacher is somebody who's done the work, rolled up the sleeves, dove into the Pali Canon, dove into these teachings, and now is able to slowly guide students through learning in a particular schematic or a particular framework. And that's one of the things that I offer as part of being your teacher, is helping to guide you through this kind of jungle of teachings, because 45 years of teaching, this Buddha has shared so many different teachings that it really helps to have somebody kind of guide you through as almost like a tour guide. But make no mistake about it that this path to enlightenment is definitely an independent journey, one in which you're learning, you're reflecting, and you're practicing the teachings in order to gain wisdom. It's your independent practice. You've got to make the decision to go to classes, to learn the teachings from books and resources, podcasts, videos. You've got to make decisions to meditate. You've got to make decisions to reach out and seek guidance from your teacher. Everything on this path that you acquire in terms of progress on this path is all based on your own effort. Your teacher is almost like a tour guide, pointing you in the right direction, telling you what things to explore, helping you walk the path for a little bit, and then sharing teachings with you so that you can go off and then reflect on those teachings and then practice them so that you can see the truth for yourself. So it's really wonderful to be able to start this path, it's very wonderful to start this program where now you guys will be able to actually study the teachings of the Buddha with his own words. And I have found that these translations are just highly accurate. I have never believed anything in any of these books. I would read these books and then go off and practice the teachings and see if it was actually true or not. And I haven't found anything yet in these books that I would consider to be false or untrue. There are some things in here that we're going to talk about today that I would recommend that you consider in terms of improving your ability to read and understand these teachings in the Pali Canon. Because reading the Buddhist teachings, it's not a casual thing. It's not just casual reading. Understanding the teachings of a fully perfectly enlightened Buddha who taught 2,500 years ago, and there's been 2,500 years of impermanence leading up to today, you're going to need to really consider and be guided, not just in the teachings, but what I'm planning to do in the first part of our class today is actually guide you in how to approach these teachings. Before we even get into studying them, is talk to you about how to even approach learning the Pali Canon to begin with. So that's what we're planning to do today. And the first thing I would like to share with you is to ensure that you're registered for this program. Because if you haven't registered using this link, which is at the bottom here, bit.ly/Pali Canon Study Group, it's really important that you register for the program. There's no cost. It's open and freely offered to all of you. But it's important that you register because in that registration link, you're going to see the schedule of the classes. The classes are going to be every Saturday at 9 p.m. Thai time, but I've laid out the schedule in terms of what books and what chapters we're going to be studying for each individual class. So if you haven't registered yet, be sure that you go to this link and you register. Put in your name and your email. I only send emails to that list for free resources. I don't sell anything through that list. I don't try to promote anything. I'm just sharing with you the various classes that we're having. And of course, I don't sell the actual list itself. So you can have trust and confidence that if you put your name and email in there, it's only going to be used for good, wholesome purposes to share the teachings of the Buddha with you. So that's the first thing. Be sure that you go and you register for this program. And now what I'd like to do is just share some details of the program and how to actually approach learning in the Buddha's teachings with the Pali Canon. So the first thing to share is that this program is going to be a live, interactive online class. It's going to be offered through Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. You can access this class through the Zoom interactive classroom, and I highly recommend that you do that because in this program, there's going to be a bit more back and forth, and you're probably going to end up needing to unmute yourself, or Max will unmute you so that you can exchange and interact with me a bit more in this program, because it's important that you have that ability to ask some follow-up questions, because you might ask a question and then I might explain it and you might say, David, I still don't understand. And then I can explain some more. And then you say, David, I'm kind of getting part of it, but I'm not sure about this part. And then I need to explain some more. And if we do the same style that we've done in the past with moderating with Max, where it goes out to Facebook and to Max and to me, this process doesn't allow the back and forth as good. So for all of you guys that are really serious about studying this and studying it closely, I recommend that you come into Zoom and that you make that your normal way of accessing the class. We will be live streaming to Facebook and YouTube, and you can watch the class back through Facebook and YouTube. The classes aren't going to show up onto our podcast until probably the middle of February. So if you would like to play these classes back, you're going to need to go to Facebook or YouTube. That these classes won't show up on the podcast for about another month and a half. And then from there, they're going to show up regularly. The class is scheduled for Saturday, 9 p.m. Thai time. So whatever time that is for you, we will be starting at that time each day. And then we're going to normally start with about a 10 or 15 minute meditation before we go into studying the Pali Canon in English. Today, we're going to forego the meditation because there's a few things that I need to share with you, and I wasn't interested in taking up too much time doing all the different things that we need to do. So I figured I would just start this meditation next week, where for about 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning of the class, we will be preparing our mind to learn the Pali Canon. This is the best way to study the Buddhist teachings and study with any teacher. If you studied with me in person at one of the temples here in Thailand, I start each class with a meditation. And then I do the Dhamma talk, because this really helps to prepare the mind, build your concentration, and clear out any clutter so that you can actually receive the Dhamma teachings, and you'll actually have a more clean transmission this way from the teacher to the student. So that's why we're going to be preparing our mind prior to class and actually studying the Pali Canon with about 10 or 15 minutes of meditation. But if you would like to be a really wise practitioner, you might actually choose to do meditation at 8 or 8:30 prior to us starting class at 9. We're going to do meditation together just to make sure that everyone's been meditating, but there's nothing that would stop you from actually doing meditation prior to class, and you're going to actually get a lot more out of the class having done that, because you've prepared your mind to receive the Dhamma. Then the way that I'm going to conduct these classes is, rather than what I do in the group learning program, where I'm actually talking about a specific chapter in the book that I wrote, what this program is about is you should have already read the given chapters. And now, out of the 25 chapters that are in this week's study, you just decide what questions you have. I'm here for guidance, like a PhD program, essentially, where you're using me as an advisor, as guidance, but I'm not going to have time to talk about all 25 chapters, and I'm not going to even pick the chapters that we actually talk about. It's up to you as you're reading, that you investigate the teachings, spend time learning them, and where you're having trouble or you're having questions or you want to confirm your learning and your understanding, that's where you'll be able to ask questions about specific words, specific sentences, certain paragraphs, or maybe even the entire piece of teachings. You might say, David, I just don't understand what the Buddha is saying here and how this applies to my life and how this applies to my practice. So the way that this class is going to be guided is, after the meditation, it's going to go right to you guys to decide what chapters we should actually study. So you can come to class with pre-planned questions about what it is that you're interested in learning in that particular class, and then we'll just go wherever your questions take us. In the Daily Wisdom Facebook group, there's going to be posts each day. just like I've done with the group learning program, where there's one post on the group learning program, there's going to be about 3 to 4 posts per day where I'm posting in the chapters of the given chapters that we're studying that week. So in the given week, I'll be posting all 25 chapters, and they'll be coming out about 3 to 4 chapters per day being posted right alongside of the group learning program. So the group learning program is going to be in the black, and then the Pali Canon in English program is going to be in green. So at the very least, if you don't have your book, or you don't have a book or a set of books, you can at least read the teachings there. And not only can you read them, but you can also ask questions there. So once I post the teachings of the Buddha in the Daily Wisdom Facebook group, you can then comment and ask a question. You can say, David, paragraph 3, I'm not clear on this. Can you help me understand it more? Or I understand paragraph 3 in this way. Is that a correct way to understand it? So not only can we talk in class and you can get guidance in class, but you can also get guidance in the Facebook group by asking and posting your own questions, or by just commenting on the post that I make with each individual chapter. You can ask your question right in there. There's the 13 books that you have access to, and here's the entire stack of those. And many of you already have these, or they're on their way to you. They're being shipped to you. I'm in the process of working with the publisher to try to get these in PDF format, and I'm not sure if that's going to be successful or not. I'm now starting to scan these in, and I'm doing a lot of work. I spent the entire day today scanning in the first 25 chapters, because since I'm posting them into Facebook, I'm also scanning them in. So I may have these in a PDF format myself within the coming 2, 3, 4 weeks, but I really would like to get the permission of the publisher to release these. But at the same time, they're the Buddhist teachings. Nobody owns the Buddhist teachings, and there's no real ownership over his teachings, and anybody who's working with the Buddhist teachings should be willing to let them go and share them. And also, I saw that the legality of this is that if you change words in the translation, it's considered a new translation, and no longer the copyright actually applies. So there's actually words that you're going to hear me share with you that I change anyway, not because of the legality part and to attempt to try to get around the legalities, but there's just some words that I feel are better suited for the Buddhist teachings that I'm changing as part of what I'm doing the work over here. So I may have these books available in a soft copy form that I can make accessible over the coming weeks. But in the meantime, if you would like printed versions, because a lot of people do like printed books, you can go to this link, which is buddhadailywisdom.com/Buddha Wajana book series. Now, the easy way to get there is just type buddhadailywisdom.com and go to the online learning menu, and at the very bottom you'll see the link there that you can purchase, and I can have these arrive to you in about 5 to 6 days anywhere in the world. I have a shipper now that's able to ship these very quickly. And then remember that there's ongoing support, that you can ask questions during the online classes or in-person classes, because I also teach here in Chiang Mai as well. You can ask questions in the Facebook group. You can private chat with me. You can schedule a personal discussion with me using this link, calendly.com/David-Roylance. And there's a lot of students that do that, and you can do that based on this program, the group learning program, things that are coming up in your life. I'm available and accessible to you now with technology. You don't need to be in the same physical city or the same physical room to receive teachings anymore. We've got this technology available to us, and we can connect. So if you go to this website, calendly.com/David-Roylance, you can schedule an appointment, and then we can connect, and this website will adjust based on your local time zone, and it will only show you appointments that are actually available, and I get notified when you schedule those. And we actually can connect right here in Zoom in a personal one-on-one meeting. So let me pause here and see if you guys have any questions on some of this beginning admin stuff that I was interested to share with you.
I think I'm fairly clear, David, and so far it appears that we are all clear.
Okay.
So unless anyone would like to raise their hand, but otherwise I think we're good to go. Oh, Judith has a question.
Okay.
Okay, Judith asks, do we have to memorize many things?
There's nothing to memorize. You don't need to memorize the Dhamma. You just need to understand it. So reading it, reflecting on it, and then practicing it. And I'm going to get to that a little bit more about how to actually do that in the coming parts of what I'm going to share with you of how to study the Dhamma. This is just what the program is. The next slide that I'm going to talk about is, why are we doing this? Why is this important? And then we're going to get into how we're going to actually do it.
Okay, we have a question from Nick, and Nick says he has a tracking number for the books, but he's interested to know what the post office link is. So that might be something we have to circle back with Nick on after the class.
If you just Google search Thai post office or Thailand post office, you'll get to the tracking ability to use that tracking number.
Okay, thank you, David. That's all our questions.
Okay. So let's go to the next part, which is the why, right? This is some things that I covered in the group learning program of why even study Gotama Buddha's teachings. Well, there's a whole chapter dedicated to that in the book that I wrote, which is chapter 2. But just to summarize a few things, is the whole goal of these teachings is to train the mind to attain enlightenment or nibbana. The practices of Gotama Buddha and the teachings of Gotama Buddha by a large part of the world are often seen as a religion. I don't see Gotama Buddha's teachings as a religion at all. I see it as a better way of life. I see it as teachings that once you learn them and you practice them, you're actually training the mind to live life in a better way. Religion to me is an organized faith practice where someone has, or an organization has collected up teachings. They disseminate them out to a group of people who then practice rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship in some kind of belief system. Gotama Buddha's teachings is not a belief system. These teachings are a discipline that if you learn them and you practice his teachings, you can independently see the truth for yourself, and through that truth, you gain wisdom. And as the mind gains this wisdom through the training of the mind gets closer and closer to enlightenment as the condition of the mind improves. So it goes from anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance. It just slowly start to eliminate these discontent feelings where the mind becomes peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy permanently. This is enlightenment. Peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy permanently. An enlightened mind will no longer experience sadness, anger, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fears, boredom, loneliness, shyness, stress, anxiety, resentment, jealousy. We can go on and on and on. All of these discontent feelings are eliminated from an enlightened mind. So that's the whole goal here, is that moving from the group learning program or into this Pali Canon in English program, or just starting with the Pali Canon in English program, like some of you guys are doing, you are actually learning teachings that you can directly apply to your life as a life practice, as a better way of life to train the mind and eliminate this discontentedness. And this is why it's not a belief system, because if you believe anything in these teachings, you'll never attain enlightenment. You have to learn them, reflect on them, practice them, and then observe the truth to acquire wisdom. And by you training the mind this way to attain this enlightened mental state, where it's peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, and you've eliminated discontentedness, not only is the mind peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, but your life as well. Because everything that you experience is experienced through the mind. So as you clean up the mind and you improve the condition of the mind to this enlightened mental state, then your life becomes very, very peaceful. And that's an important aspect of these teachings, is that's why enlightened people experience a lot of peacefulness in their life, because their mind is peaceful. They never experience these discontent feelings any longer. And because of that, in acquiring this wisdom, you will see that your relationships, both personal and professional, will be improved. You'll increase your concentration, your focus, your memory, your clarity of mind. All of these things improve as you get closer and closer to enlightenment. So you're going to see real tangible benefits the more you learn, reflect, and practice the teachings of the Buddha. And by working towards eliminating this discontent mind, which is the problem that we're solving with Gotama Buddha's teachings, is we're solving this problem of the discontent mind, attaining enlightenment. That's the major problem that you're solving in this life. And through solving that problem, you actually solve the bigger problem. The bigger problem that we are all experiencing is this cycle of rebirth. Everyone's being reborn constantly in this cycle of rebirth throughout all the 5 realms. If you're listening to this right now, you are in a human existence. Therefore, you have never attained enlightenment ever in your whole series of past lives. And that's the whole reason why you're born. And that's the whole reason why you're still experiencing sickness, aging, and death. And these keeps going over and over and over again, where you keep being reborn, you keep getting sick, you keep aging, and you keep dying. And in that process, you're experiencing some miserable experiences, because it's really miserable to be sad. It's really miserable to be angry. It's very miserable to feel guilty and shameful. It's very miserable to feel lonely and bored, right? Having stress and anxiety is no fun. And the way to eliminate all of these discontent feelings is to progress on this path to enlightenment. And having done so, the rest of your life, you'll experience a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy for the rest of this life. And you'll know that because the mind will be so utterly peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. You'll know that you're there, and you'll just get to enjoy the rest of this life with this mental state of enlightenment. And then you will never be reborn again to experience all of this discontentedness again. So you're solving the real problem that we all have faced, which is we're stuck in this cycle of rebirth. And once we attain enlightenment, we get that peaceful mind with this concentration, focus, memory, and clarity of mind. Our relationships will be improved because we'll be interacting with people in a more loving, compassionate way. So our personal and professional relationships will be improved, and our entire life will be peaceful. But it's a gradual process of moving towards that enlightened mind, enjoying it for the rest of your life, and then knowing that you're never going to be reborn again. Because you can attain enlightenment at death. You can either attain it during your life or at death. But if you attain enlightenment at your death, that means you experienced a whole life of discontentedness and you never got to enjoy this enlightened mental state. So what we're doing by learning this path to enlightenment is we're applying some time, effort, energy, and resources to learning the teachings, applying them in our life, attaining enlightenment while we're still alive, so then we can enjoy the rest of our life in that enlightened mental state. And then when we die, everything's peaceful, rather than go all the way through life being miserable, potentially being reborn countless more times, or going through life miserable, dying, attaining enlightenment at death. But where's the fun in that? You didn't get to enjoy this peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. So by you applying dedication and commitment and effort to learning and practicing these teachings now during your life, you're going to actually get closer and closer to this mental state of enlightenment, where you'll enjoy the benefits of having done so and solve this major problem of the cycle of rebirth. Are there any questions on why we're actually studying the Pali Canon in English?
I'd like to ask a question about one of these points here, David. So the enlightened mind is one that has eliminated discontentedness of mind. So no craving, no anger, and no delusion. So it sounds like they really have no problems, right? An enlightened mind has no problems.
And
then, so there's no problem with being alive for an enlightened mind. And yet it is enlightenment that prevents rebirth. So it seems like a kind of paradox. Perhaps you can help me unpack this one.
I'm not seeing the paradox there, but let me just share something before you maybe update your question a bit. Is an enlightened being is still going to face challenges in their life. There's still going to be challenges, but they're not going to look at them as problems. It's not a problem. It's just, oh, okay, so my car's broke down. What do I need to do to fix that? Oh, my son came home with bad grades. What do we need to do to fix that? Oh, my house needs a new roof. What do we need to do to take care of that? So an enlightened person is still in life. They're still living a human existence. They're no longer experiencing discontentedness, and they've got this profound wisdom. They're still going to experience impermanence, but they're not going to know how to deal with it because they've trained their mind to not be shaken up by impermanence. So they're not going to feel stressed when they realize they have to fix their roof, or when their car breaks down. They're not going to feel any stress or anxiety from that because they know it's impermanent, and they're just going to apply wisdom to fix it and figure out how to fix the solution rather than getting stressed or anxious or having any guilt or shame or fear or sadness because of this impermanence. So enlightened beings still experience impermanence. It's just that now they've trained their mind so well, they can deal with it seamlessly and smooth rather than the mind becoming discontent due to the impermanence.
Right. So they will certainly experience challenges, but they would not experience problems as such because the mind would not be discontent.
Right. It doesn't look at the world as problems anymore. It looks at it as, oh, there's some impermanence there. That's a little challenge. Let me figure out how to fix that.
Right. So it's only unenlightened beings that could have a problem really with being alive in the first place.
Yeah.
It's only unenlightened beings that can experience it.
When you're unenlightened, everything's a problem, right? You look at everything as a problem. So part of moving the mind to enlightenment is even when you're unenlightened, stop looking at things as a problem and just look at it as there's a situation, there's a challenge. Let's figure out how to solve it. An enlightened person is a very good problem solver because by the time you get to enlightenment, you've solved a major problem. By the time you've gotten to enlightenment, you've solved that major problem of the discontent mind. So you've had to be a problem solver for many, many years to get to solving the problem of your mind. You had to learn all these teachings and meditation and all the different ways to meditate and the uniquenesses of how to meditate. You've solved many problems in order to get to enlightenment. So by the time you're enlightened, anything that you look at is no longer a problem, it's just a challenge. So now, even if you're unenlightened, anything that comes up in your life, just look at it as a challenge. Like Max, I think you've shared about how the ambulance crew broke down your door when you weren't there, thinking that they were coming in to save somebody, but it ended up being the wrong flat. Well, you had a challenge to handle. You had to get your money back. You had to talk to the lawyers. That was a challenge as opposed to a problem. Let's just figure out how to solve this challenge. Or, like some of the examples I gave about a car breaking down, or if you're not quite comfortable with where you live and it's too noisy or too loud, okay, this is a challenge. Let me figure out how to fix it. And you just apply wisdom and good decision making to try to fix it. So if you stop looking at things that come up in your life as a problem, that will help you to move the mind closer to enlightenment, because now you can just see things as a challenge and just find the wisdom that you need to apply in good decision making to solve these problems that you may be looking at as a problem, but it's really just a challenge that you can overcome because this challenge is impermanent.
Okay, so Rhonda has asked a question to elaborate on the one I asked. She asks, I am ambivalent on this point, as I have always liked the idea of a more permanent existence on a higher heavenly level, the reward for good living. So how do we settle into, once you're enlightened, it is just over?
We don't know that it's just over. This is one of the things that is a very big misunderstanding in the Buddhist world. People think that the Buddha taught that once you are enlightened and you die, everything's done and your life is extinguished. But that's not what the Buddha taught. And it's actually in this part of the books of Buddha Vajana where you can see that the Buddha left this as an undeclared teaching. What happens to us once we attain enlightenment and die? He left it as an undeclared teaching. We know that we don't get reborn, but if there's an afterlife after having attained enlightenment and die, we don't share that. That's an undeclared teaching. So there may be something next or may not. But regardless, once you attain enlightenment, your life is so peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. Your mind is so peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. If there's anything next, so what? It must be as good as what you're experiencing now or better. And if there isn't anything next, okay, so what? Just let it go. The problem here is that your mind wants something to be next. Your mind wants some pleasant dwelling after death. And that's that craving, desire, attachment that's keeping you trapped in this life and in this cycle of rebirth. You've got to let go of the idea or thought or craving, desire, any mental longing with a strong eagerness to have something after this life or know what's after this life or some kind of existence after this life. Just forget it. It's in the future. Don't worry about it. Just focus on the present moment and getting to a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy now. And then it's kind of like all options are open because it's undeclared teaching. You don't know, but as long as you hold on, craving and wanting to know what's next, or craving some pleasant dwelling after this life, then you won't ever get to enlightenment because the mind still has craving, and you've got to extinguish that.
Okay, thank you, David. We have no more questions at this time.
Okay, so let's go into how we're going to actually do this as our program here unfolds. Each of these books, each of these 25 books, I've basically separated them into 25 chapters per week. And what that means is most of these books we're going to be studying 2 weeks. So the first half of this book is 25 chapters. The last half is about 25 chapters. And there's some books that we might be studying for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, the thicker ones, but the vast majority of them are kind of like 2 weeks. It'll take you about 45 minutes to an hour to read 25 chapters because they're really short and small pages. But nonetheless, you'll read about 25 chapters per week, and somewhere between 30 minutes to an hour that you need to dedicate for reading each week of the book. And we're going to be doing this online, like I said, through Zoom and live streaming. You can access these recordings on Facebook and YouTube, and then the podcast will come in February. But I really encourage you guys to join via Zoom because you're going to have a much better experience that way. But remember, it's an independent study. It's an independent journey. It's important for you to read the book before class. If you haven't read the book and you just couldn't get to it, but you're able to attend a class, still attend the class. Don't feel like you need to feel guilty by not showing up to the class. Still show up because you're still going to get something from the class, but you'll get the most benefit if you read before the class, because the class is meant to be kind of the end of you reading, where you can now ask questions based on your reading and any clarification that you needed. There's also some audio recordings that other people did. They're not as clear as what I did with my book, but they are available on our YouTube channel and on the podcast site, there's about 7 or 8 of the books that are recorded in audio. You can watch the videos because I have them on YouTube as well, and they're in the podcast, and you can ask questions. Remember, this group learning program that we were doing and we are continuing to do with Developing a Life Practice, the path that leads to Nibbana, is like a bachelor's or master's degree, where there's classes that you come to and the teacher actually is teaching you and sharing the various details from the chapters. What a PhD program is like, which is what this program is it's independent study, where you've essentially already done a lot of studying and now you're just coming to your advisor or to your teacher to get pointed in the right direction and get clarifications on certain things. So what you're going to see is where we're going to actually get to is where we're just going to meditate, and then I'm going to say, what questions do you guys have? And I'm just making myself available for the 2 hours of class for you guys to ask any questions and for me to help you and guide you through this program of your own independent learning of the Dhamma in these books. Be sure that as you're reading, that you don't believe anything in the books. It's independently verifying the truth through practice of the teachings. It's the only way that you're going to awaken the mind is by not believing anything that I say or even that Gotama Buddha says. Read it, understand it, use me to help you understand it, reflect on those teachings, and then practice them in daily life and look to see if they're actually true or not. And then if you're not understanding it through your practice, get some more clarification and more guidance. Be sure that you've established your daily meditation practice and you're continuing to work on that. 2 to 3 times a day for at least 30 minutes or more is what you would like to build up to. But of course, if you're at 10 or 15 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, wherever you are, that's fine. Just keep working towards 30 minutes or more per day without timing it. Don't actually time it, but just kind of get in the habit of sitting or standing or laying or walking for at least 30 minutes per session per day. So if you're getting at least morning and evening meditation, you're right around about an hour of meditation per day. You're going to see the most benefits with this type of ability to actually meditate 2 or 3 times a day. And you just need to gradually work your way in that direction with breathing mindfulness meditation and loving kindness meditation. It's very important that you're working on both of those because they solve 2 different problems in the mind. And anything that you've studied previously with other teachers, I would just ask that you kind of kindly set that to the side, because what you're going to be learning here with Gotama Buddha's teachings are the true teachings of the Buddha. Now, if you've learned things other places and you would like to bring that up and try to confirm or understand that in reflection to what the Buddha is actually teaching, sure, I'll help you with that. But if you've learned that you're supposed to pray to the Buddha, and in your meditation you're praying to the Buddha, and that's what you've been taught in other Buddhist venues, I would like you to set that to the side, because you're going to get more benefit if you don't do that, because the Buddha never taught that. Or if you've been taught a particular chant that if you say these 10 words 30 times a day and that's what's going to lead to enlightenment, I would ask that you set that to the side, because that's not something the Buddha taught either. So the more that you get in touch with what the Buddha actually taught and you practice those teachings, the more benefit that you're actually going to receive through training the mind in this way. So let's go to the next part. The next part is talking about the various, oops, did I go too far? Yes, there we go. Okay, the next part is talking about ensuring that you understand that approaching the Pali Canon in English is not casual reading. You really need to investigate the teachings. The Buddha talks about this. He talks about investigating his teachings and interrogating his teachings. That's the very first piece of Dhamma that is actually in this book. In the very first chapter, he talks a little bit about interrogating his teachings. And then in other places, he talks about investigating his teachings. It's active reading, where you really need to be active with the reading that you're doing. If you are reading and you don't understand a particular word, you need to investigate that word. And I would suggest using multiple sources, because now with the internet, you can look up the word in 2 or 3 or 4 different dictionaries at the snap of a finger. So don't just read casually like you're trying to entertain yourself, but you're really diving into the teachings. And wherever you see something that you don't understand, go off to dictionaries, send me a private message, ask a question in the Facebook group, schedule a personal guidance, any of these ways to really make sure that you understand it. Don't just skip over it and be like, oh, I'll come back to that later, or, oh, I don't need to know that. Every single phrase, every single paragraph, every single piece of teachings, you would like to make sure that you understand very deeply, and that's going to require you to actually investigate the teachings. And on that same note, don't assume that words that you see the translator use, don't assume that your meaning and the definition of the way that you currently understand those words is the same way that the translator actually used it. Because what I found is, as I was reading these books, the translator was using certain words, and I was like, that's kind of odd. That's strange. I wouldn't have used that word in that situation. And I went off and investigated the word, and it actually had a different meaning than what I thought the word meant. So part of learning the Dhamma and gaining this wisdom is actually gaining wisdom about language and how we communicate with each other. So don't just assume that words you run into, that the translator was using them in the same way that you were using them. So feel free to investigate these definitions of individual words and then reflect on that. And you'll actually expand your vocabulary quite a bit through studying the Dhamma, because the translators who translated these teachings seem to be very much experts in not only Pali, but in English too, because the words that they've chosen to use in English really illuminate the Buddha's teachings very, very well. So feel free to investigate these individual words. Don't be concerned about just completing the task. Like if you know that you've got 25 chapters to read and you plan to sit down in a 1 hour and actually read these teachings, if you sit down in the first 10 minutes, you're like, whoa, that was really deep. The Buddha is actually sharing something really deep there. I need to think about that. Put the book down for a couple of hours. Put the book down for a couple of days and really think about and reflect on the teaching that you just read. There were several times where I sat down and I was planning to read for an hour or so. And I got 5 or 10 minutes into what I was reading, and I was like, whoa, I need to stop right there. And I wouldn't go farther in the book until I fully grasped what it was that the Buddha was talking about in that particular teaching. If that took me several days or even several weeks in some cases. So take your time, read for comprehension, not just to complete the task. So you interested in reading and understanding and then applying it in daily life. You're not just trying to sit down and read like a homework assignment and you're just trying to finish the 25 chapters in a given time. What you're doing is you're walking through this in an independent way to ensure that you're comprehending the teachings, and then when you're done, you can actually apply them in daily life. You're also interested in investigating these teachings, and as you do, what you might notice is something that the Buddha taught. The Buddha says in his teachings that when you start investigating his teachings, you might experience a zeal spring up in you. This is the words that the translator used. It essentially means excitement. And he even shares this as part of the 7 factors of enlightenment. He says if you ever notice a sluggish mind, that you can actually study his teachings and investigate his teachings in order to bring zeal or to raise excitement in the mind. So if you're sitting around the house and you're feeling lonely or bored or sluggish, or your mind's kind of dull, and you feel like, I don't want to read today, my mind's kind of dull, or I'm kind of feeling sluggish or complacent, if you'll pick up the book and just force yourself to do it, as you read the teachings, your mind will actually move from that sluggish mind into the middle, because through reading the Buddha's teachings, it kind of springs up this excitement. It kind of springs up this zeal. So don't just push off the teachings because the mind is sluggish or a little bit lazy. That's actually the perfect reason to pick up the book, to spring up the mind. But conversely, if your mind is already excited, or even if your mind is fairly calm, you've got to be aware with mindfulness. You have to have awareness of mind, because as you read these teachings, your mind might start getting excited as you're reading more and more of his teachings, because they're so illuminating. So be aware of that. If you see your mind getting too excited and you're craving to read and you just want to read more and more, and you're having this longing and strong eagerness to read, you might need to just put the book down and kind of cut that off, even if you've only been reading for 10 or 15 minutes. And then another side of this that I don't have on the actual slide is you may even notice that your mind becomes very sleepy sometimes too, because as the mind awakens, sometimes it becomes very sleepy. So as you're reading the Buddha's teachings, you might notice that you also can become very sleepy as well. That's another side of this. But most often what I experienced was this excitement or zeal that the Buddha talked about, but there were some occasions where the mind became somewhat sleepy. And as I mentioned here, if you observe any craving arise, just put the book down and reflect on what it is that is causing the craving. And if it's craving to learn the Buddha's teachings, that's another craving that you need to eliminate. Not only do we need to eliminate craving, desire, attachment to in our relationships and our possessions and our jobs and everything else, but you need to eliminate all craving. So if you notice that your mind just, is really wanting and craving to study the Buddha's teachings, you've got to get to a point where you recognize that and you can set the book down and you can feel okay with that, and put some distance between you and the book for a few hours or a few days, and then go back to it where you can slowly, calmly progress through the teachings in a more consistent way. Here, this last thing I shared it was a little bit of a joke, but I really mean what I'm saying here, is ask questions before class, during class, and after class. Essentially what I'm saying here is ask questions. All of these teachings, this entire path to enlightenment, it's not about the teacher pushing teachings into you and forcing you to do something. That's not what this path is about whatsoever. This path is about the students pulling the teachings out of the teacher. And the way that you do that is through asking questions. So if it's before class, if it's during class, if it's after class, I'm making myself available for you guys to access and seek guidance in order to learn and understand these teachings very, very thoroughly. So let me pause here and see if you guys have any questions on the last few things that I've been sharing.
I have a question, David, about this excitement. Is that a discontent mind state?
It is. It's part of those pleasant feelings, and you've got to bring the mind to the middle. So if you notice the mind is sluggish and complacent, you can use investigating the teachings, and the Buddha actually recommends this, is investigate the teachings to bring it to the middle. But you've also got to be careful that you don't overshoot that and you bring it back to the middle. Or if your mind is calm and you start reading and the mind becomes excited, you got to have mindfulness or awareness of mind and realize that and bring it back to the middle. Or if you're already excited, it's not usually the best time to start reading and studying the Buddhist teachings, because the mind can actually become more excited. So you've got to perhaps before you read is do some meditation. This is what I used to do. I used to oftentimes meditate for 30 minutes or however long, an hour or whatever, and then I would actually study the Buddhist teachings. So I would prepare the mind to read this book and make sure that I was absorbing the teachings that the Buddha had to share. And then in some cases, I would also meditate afterwards too, to help the teachings soak in. And this is where you've got to be an independent practitioner. You've got to have awareness of mind and know where the mind's at any given time. That's not just for this program, but that's for daily life. So if you're getting ready to read and you're planning to sit down and read, why not do 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes of meditation? Even though you meditated in the morning, put another little bit of meditation in there. Meditate, read the teachings, study the teachings, reflect on those, write down any questions, send me questions, schedule appointments, what have you, based on what you've studied, and then do some more meditation afterwards, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes, just to kind of allow the teachings to soak into the mind. And if you do this, it will really help you to keep your mind in the middle, because yes, this excitement is discontentedness.
Okay, thank you for that, David. We have no more questions at the moment.
Okay, so we're almost to the point where we're actually going to study today. So the next part is the last part that I have to share with you, which is how to actually study the teachings. When you go through these particular books, these books have been translated by lots of different translators. And the temple in Bangkok, they had a staff of about 100 or 200 people that have gone through these 45 volumes of books, and they've extracted the most important teachings and put them into these books. So these are curated versions of the Pali Canon. They're kind of like the cliff notes of the Pali Canon. So you've got very different translators in different cases that are using different words for different situations. And I don't necessarily always agree with the translations and the words that they're choosing. So I've provided this as a way to improve your experience if you're reading the hard copy of these or the original copies, that you use these updated and improved words of translating rather than the words that are in this book. So if you're watching this right now on a phone or on a computer, I suggest you screen capture this particular slide, because you're going to need it as you're reading. If you see the word suffering, which is pretty much used 99% of the time in the book, you should instead insert in the mind the word discontent, discontented, or discontentedness. Most often it's discontentedness. So that word suffering, which I've explained in the book that I published, as well in all the classes that I teach, why I don't use the word suffering. So discontentedness is a much better choice that will bring your mind to more fully understanding what it is that the Buddha was teaching. Additionally, people will use the word happy or happiness. They're using the word suffering to describe dukkha, what it is the Buddha is teaching to eliminate. They're using the word happy or happiness as a way of explaining what it is to attain in this practice. There's some people who feel that enlightenment is to attain happiness, or to be happy, eternally happy, or blissful. That's not what I have experienced in terms of what the way that I would describe enlightenment. I wouldn't describe it as happy or happiness. And for those of you guys that have been studying with me long enough, or you've read the book or listened to any of the materials and resources that I share, you understand why I don't use the word happy or happiness, but instead insert peacefulness or peaceful. Those are the words that would bring your mind to better understand what it is the Buddha is talking about, rather than use the word that the translator selected. You're often going to see the word lust, and you'll see that even in the Dhamma that we're studying today, that the translator used the word lust. What this is oftentimes we associate lust with like sexual craving. or, kind of sexual contact or desiring sexual contact. But in reality, the translator is using the word lust as desire. The same way that we use craving, desire, attachment, they are oftentimes using the word lust. But it's not a sexual lust. It's actually just a mental longing with a strong eagerness. So I suggest you replace lust with desire. Then there's this word faith that comes up occasionally. When we think of the word faith, we tend to think of blind faith or just believing. The word faith is most often used in reference to the Buddha. You'll see that the translators, as they translate, the Buddha said, "Have faith in me." Well, the Buddha wasn't saying to believe him or have faith in him. What he was saying is have confidence in him. So be sure you replace the word faith with confidence. You'll also see this word spiritual rapture or rapture. That was in our studying of these 25 chapters this week. This word spiritual rapture or rapture should be translated as joy. This is that unconditioned joy that I talk about with enlightenment, where the mind's peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. So when you see the word spiritual rapture or rapture, just think about joy, this unconditioned joy. Sometimes the translators use to refer to the Buddha, they refer to him as the Blessed One or Lord. And these are typically translators who have a Christian background, and they're translating the title for the Buddha as Blessed One or Lord. The Buddha never called himself a Lord, and he never talked about anybody being blessed. So he's not the Blessed One and he's not the Lord, even though you're going to see that in the translations within these books. What I would suggest you insert instead is fully, perfectly enlightened one. This is what a Buddha is, a fully, perfectly enlightened one. Another title that you could use if you like is Master Teacher Gotama. You'll see that some of the translators use that instead of Blessed One or Lord. They will use fully, perfectly enlightened one or perfectly enlightened one or Master Teacher Gotama. Sometimes they'll even use aesthetic Gotama. So because there's different translators translating the various teachings, you're going to see different translations at different times because it's not the same author all the way through the book. And as we progress here, we might find some other words that I will help you with, but these are the ones from my recollection that I remember being the most important ones to actually adjust and change to help you better understand the Dhamma and the teachings that the Buddha actually shared. All of these improved translations that I'm sharing with you will bring your mind to understand the Buddhist teachings much, much more. And you'll get really good at just every time you see suffering, just think discontentedness. You see happiness or happy, think peacefulness. You see lust, desire, faith, confidence, spiritual rapture, joy, Blessed One or Lord, fully, perfectly enlightened one, Master Teacher Gotama. So just always remember that as you're progressing through.
Thank you, David. And so this discontentedness also includes the pleasant feelings you just talked about, right? So like excitement as well and happiness. And so these things would come under discontentedness, but we need to think discontentedness instead of suffering, because suffering, you wouldn't normally think excitement or happiness when you hear the word suffering.
Right. That's why I don't use the word happy or happiness to describe enlightenment, but the translators are using that. Because think about these translators, right? I know at least one of the translators is on record for saying he is not enlightened. This is Bhikkhu Bodhi. I saw a recent interview with him where a interviewer asked him, "Are you enlightened?" And he said, "No, very far from it." That was his response. So here's an unenlightened person who's tasked with, and he's decided to do, is translate this old language that is no longer a spoken language today into a modern English language. This is a huge task for anybody to do. But for an unenlightened person to translate, it's very, very challenging. But not only is he just translating Pali to English would be hard enough if it was just an average Joe out in the street that you were reading his book and you were translating from Pali to English. That would be hard enough. But to translate the words of a fully, perfectly enlightened Buddha for an unenlightened person is very, very challenging, because the mind of a fully, perfectly enlightened Buddha thinks very, 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 very differently than an unenlightened being. A fully, perfectly enlightened Buddha is going to have a mind and a vocabulary and a way of thinking about the world and thinking about these teachings that the average person, particularly the average unenlightened person, is not going to be thinking about. So these words that are being used by the various translators, I admire them highly for taking on the task to actually do the translations. It took Bhikkhu Bodhi 27 years to actually translate the Pali Canon to what he's done in his work. So he's dedicated 27 years of his life to doing that. Well, I admire him highly for that. But the task is just an almost unsurmountable task. So what we do in this tradition is everybody kind of puts their bit of improvement so that all of us together are improving the teachings more and more and more. So Bhikkhu Bodhi did a massive service to the community by translating, and the other translators as well, by translating all of this into English. And what I'm doing here through my reading is I'm saying, okay, here's a few words that I would just suggest that you tweak in order to bring your mind to a better understanding of this based on how I observe the teachings in daily life. And if you do this, it'll bring your mind to a better understanding, because suffering isn't the appropriate word in my view, and happy or happiness isn't the appropriate word either, because the goal is to attain this peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy.
Okay, thank you, David. It appears we have no questions at the moment.
Okay, so we're at the point today where it's time to actually study chapters 1 through 25. And in future classes, we're going to arrive to this point within 15 minutes of class. So we're going to have a good hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes to study. Excuse me. We can take as much time as you want, but it seems like a 2-hour class is about what people seem to really gravitate towards. So today we have about an hour left of class, but even with an hour and 45 minutes, we're not going to be able to study all 25 chapters. So what I've got is I've got loaded into my software here, and Max has got it loaded into his software, all 25 chapters loaded in. But we're only going to look at the chapters that you guys decide you have questions about. So if Bill raises his hand or types into the comments that he has a question about chapter 2, Max and I will move to chapter 2 and allow Bill to ask his question, or Max will ask it for him, and then we'll talk about chapter 2. Or if, Nick has a question about chapter 13, then we'll go to chapter 13. So all of the study, that's why I call this a study group as opposed to a group learning program. It's a study group where I'm providing the ability for you guys to seek guidance based on your own independent study. And I realize some of you guys haven't gotten the books at this point, and that's understandable. They're on their way. They'll get to you. It's just a matter of time. So let's see if there's any questions on any of the chapters 1 through 25, and then I'll show you guys how together as a group we're going to study this Dhamma piece by piece as you guys have questions.
Okay, well, perhaps, Dave, we can start with chapter 1.
Okay.
It seems to set the scene quite well. I've got a question about chapter 1.
Okay, what's your question, Max?
So, chapter 1, which I've now put up on screen, this this second paragraph here, he says, when those discourses spoken by the Tathagata are being recited that are deep in meaning, world transcending, connected with emptiness. What does he mean by world transcending and connected with emptiness?
Okay, so world transcending is the Buddha basically saying that these teachings can be spread all throughout the world and they will help all people, right? That's what world transcending means. Connected with emptiness means that it brings the mind to emptiness, where the minds actually can train the mind to empty out all of this discontentedness, all of this clutter, and it brings the mind to emptiness, where it's just perfectly still, peaceful, and calm.
Okay, thank you. Makes sense.
And overall, talking about this chapter is what the Buddha is really saying here, and the reason why they make it the first chapter in the whole series is, remember during the Buddha's lifetime, it was the Buddha and his students, but then there were lots of other teachers teaching about enlightenment. And those teachers were claiming that they had discovered the teachings, and some of them even claimed they were the Buddha, right? So the Buddha knew that he had attained enlightenment, and these other teachers hadn't attained enlightenment, and that what they were teaching wasn't accurate. So there are certain times where his students were listening to his teachings and their mind was improving, their practice was improving. And there were other students that from the Buddha that would maybe actually go to another teacher. They would be studying with the Buddha and some other teacher at the same time. But what the Buddha is saying here is that he's observing that people are interested in learning his teachings, not the other teachers. Because once they go to the other teachers and they hear what the other teachers have to say, they're not interested in learning those teachings. So the Buddha here is basically saying that here in this kind of assembly, when those discourses are being recited that are mere poetry, composed by poets, beautiful in words and phrases, created by outsiders, spoken by disciples, the bhikkhus, meaning the students, don't want to listen to them. Do not lend an ear to them or apply their minds to understand them. They do not think those teachings should be studied and learned. So he's basically saying those other teachers are talking with poetry and beautiful words and phrases, but people don't really want to learn them. But when those discourses spoken by the Tathagata, which is the Buddha, are being recited that are deep in meaning, world transcending, applying to the whole world, connected with emptiness, the bhikkhus want to listen to them, lend an ear to them, and apply their minds to understand them. They think those teachings should be studied, and then there's more on the next page. Studied and learned. And having learned those teachings, they interrogate them. They interrogate each other, right? So once they learn the teachings, they investigate and interrogate each other about these teachings and examine them thoroughly. That's what I was just sharing with you guys, to examine the teachings, investigate the teachings, asking, what is this? So the Buddha would talk and he would give discourses, and then he would go away and teach other people. And now these monks are sitting there talking and interrogating each other and trying to understand what it is that the Buddha was teaching. And they ask, how is this? What is the meaning of this? This is the reflection that I was talking about, to learn the teachings and reflect on it, right? Reflect on it in your mind. How is this? What is this? And they disclose to others what is obscure and elusive, what is unclear, and dispel their perplexity about numerous perplexing points. This is called the assembly trained in interrogation, not in vain talk. So his monks are spending time to learn the teachings, investigate them thoroughly, reflect on them, help each other to understand these words and understand the teachings. Where there's things that are unclear, they need to help each other to understand them and make them more clear. And this is what he's calling a group of people, an assembly, that are trained in interrogating the teachings, not in vain talk. Vain talk would be like disparaging the teachings, or disparaging each other, or talking harshly with each other. They're sitting there diligently studying as diligent students, trying to understand these teachings, rather than sit there and complain and disparage each other. They're actually attempting to learn the teachings from each other, even though the Buddha's not there. Because if Max understands 20% of a particular topic and Judith understands the other 20%, and now they're talking together, they learn 40% of the teachings, and they have 40% of the teachings. And then when the teacher comes, you try to confirm your understanding and what it is that you understand, and then the teacher adds the other 60%. So if we're all working to interrogate the teachings, now as a group, we understand 100% of the teachings, rather than Max trying to debate and look like he's so smart and he knows all the teachings and he's only going to know whatever he knows, which is that 20%. And if Judith was doing the same thing, where she's trying to win in this debate and she knows 20% and she feels like she knows 100%, so now instead of helping each other, they're fighting each other of who's going to win and who knows the most, because of arrogance and ego. And now they walk away from the conversation with only 20% each. Whereas if they work together and help each other understand the teachings, now they know 40% of the teachings. Then if they reach out to the teacher for more guidance, now they get that extra 60, and they walk away from the conversation knowing 100% of the teachings, rather than just the 20% if they had arrogance and ego approaching this topics. And what the Buddha says in this last paragraph is these bhikkhus are the two kinds of assemblies. Of these two kinds of assemblies, the assembly trained in interrogation, not in vain talk, is foremost, meaning those who sit around and interrogate the teachings and help each other, they are the ones who are really performing well. That's the ideal situation that we should be working towards in our community.
Okay, I can see that we have a couple of hands up, and Bill, you were first, so let's start with you, Bill. I'll unmute you now.
Thanks, Max. If it's okay, can we go to chapter 10?
Sure.
And the second paragraph, so he's referring to right view, which in my understanding is he's talking about the Four Noble Truths. And he says, here Ananda, a bhikkhu develops right view, which is based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing, and release. So I was kind of lining those four words up with the Four Noble Truths, and it wasn't clear to me why he chose to use the word seclusion. And then dispassion, I looked up the definition. There's a whole paragraph of different synonyms to help explain that word.
Yeah, so here he's not talking about, when he's talking about seclusion, dispassion, cessation, maturing, and release, that's not referring to the Four Noble Truths necessarily. What he's referring to here is literally seclusion. And I've talked about this with some of the students, that when you first start learning these teachings, you kind of seclude yourself, right? Because think about what the Buddha did is he left from society and he went into the jungle, and he only really came out to get food. So what some people do when they're first kind of getting into these teachings is their life kind of shuts down, where you don't even really have any friends around you. Like all your friends are kind of gone, and you've decided, like, I'm just going to kind of seclude myself. And people do this for long periods of time. I did this for about 3 years or 4 years, where I became very secluded and really just on my own. And then dispassion and cessation is letting things go and eliminating discontentedness. And maturing and release, what this is once you establish right view and you start practicing all these other teachings and you're working on eliminating these 10 fetters, there's sometimes when you have a certain attachment or a certain craving that as you're working to eliminate it through dispassion and cessation, which proceeds with seclusion, through being secluded, working with dispassion to let this go, to work to eliminate this craving, the Buddha says it matures and release. You can actually feel the craving actually leave the mind. It can actually bubble up to a point where you can actually feel it kind of leave the mind. And I have had that happen on a number of occasions with different cravings. And what happens is you just kind of feel it build and build and build and build and build, and you're chipping away at it with your meditation, with your daily practice, with all the other things that you learn on this path, and you just actually feel all this mature, like a fine wine kind of aging, and then it will eventually release from the mind, and you may actually feel it when it happens. There's a few students that have talked to me that haven't even studied these teachings yet, and they've actually experienced this as well. So that's what he's talking about here, is through secluding yourself, being focused on dispassion, which is giving things and letting things go. Dispassion is letting things go. Then cessation is the elimination of discontentedness. By working on eliminating it, you can sometimes just apply your mind to a certain craving if your practice is developed enough, and then you can just feel it release. So that's what he's referring to here. He's not actually referring to the Four Noble Truths. When you look at the Eightfold Path, which is also in this part of the book, you'll see when he describes what is right view, he will explain the Four Noble Truths. Here, he's not explaining what is right view. He's just saying that in order to pursue this holy life, a student needs to first develop right view. And then what right view is the Four Noble Truths, and you should base that in seclusion, dispassion, cessation, which will mature and release. Or another way to say that is it will release as it matures.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, let's go to you next then, Sue.
Hi, David. I have a question about chapter 6.
Okay.
The first paragraph says, Bhikkhus, those for whom you have compassion and who you think should be heeded, whether friends or colleagues, relatives or kinsmen, these you should exhort, settle, and establish for making the breakthrough to the Four Noble Truths as they are. I'm not understanding that paragraph very well.
Okay. What he's saying here is that once you understand the Four Noble Truths and how you cause your own discontentedness, and you can eliminate your discontentedness, and there's this path to enlightenment, what he's saying is, for people whom you have compassion, people who you are concerned about their misfortune, who you think, should be heeded, like meaning you think that will accept and understand and apply effort to learning and understanding, whether they're friends or colleagues or relatives or kinsmen, these are people that you should try to expose them to the Four Noble Truths as they really are. So, for example, Sue, like your husband, even though, we've had discussions about that, it's maybe not the right time, but because you have compassion for him, he's somebody who at some point may heed your advice, and he's a friend, a colleague, a relative, a kinsman. Same like your daughters. These are people around you that you have compassion for, and where you see a window of opportunity, you may decide that it's the right time to kind of expose them to the Four Noble Truths in one way or another. And he gives the different relationships here: friends, colleagues, relatives, or kinsmen. Where, like a stranger, if it was a stranger, you have no ability to influence that person and expose them to the Four Noble Truths. So that wouldn't be ideal. What would be ideal is if the person has already got a relationship with you. And that's why he gives these particular categories of friends, colleagues, relatives, or kinsmen. And there's skillful ways of how to kind of introduce the teachings to people. And it's not always going to happen when and how you expect, so you shouldn't have expectations. It might be after you've already learned for 2, 3, 4 years, and your mind is much more enlightened than it really is right now. Because one of the things that I observed is that if you have craving, desire, attachment in a relationship, it's really difficult for you to expose them to these teachings, because you're going to get emotional, you're going to get angry, you're going to get frustrated or irritated. And here you are trying to share with them the Four Noble Truths about how to attain enlightenment, but yet you're frustrated yourself. So as you get more and more enlightened, where you no longer are experiencing irritation or frustration in the relationship with your friends, colleague, relatives, or kinsmen, when you've gotten to that place with those particular people, that would be a more ideal time to maybe expose them to the Four Noble Truths a bit.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Interesting here, David, that he says, those for whom you have compassion.
Yes.
I'm curious what he might have meant there.
So compassion is concern for others' misfortune, right? So you might have relatives that you don't have an enormous amount of compassion for because you're still on your journey. By the time you get to enlightenment, you're going to have compassion for everybody, for all beings. But when you're still in that first, second stage of enlightenment, you're not going to have compassion for everybody. But you might still understand the Four Noble Truths pretty well, and you might have a colleague who you're not attached to, you don't have any irritation or frustration with, but yet they're just having a really bad day, or they're having a hard time, or maybe they just came out of a hard time and they're looking for some improvements. Maybe they had a family member who died and their mind is somewhat discontent now, 2 months or 3 months later, and they come to you and they say, hey Max, I know you've been doing some different things and you seem to always have a calm mind, but I just can't get over that my mom died. And then that might be an open window for you. So the Buddha here isn't sharing to go out and push or force the teachings on people. What he's doing is saying, be selective about it. Only do it with people that you have compassion for. And then I'm adding the piece of do it with people that you don't have attachment with, because your mind's going to be more calm and be able to actually share the teachings with them when you don't have attachment to that person. Because if you have attachment and you really want that person to learn the teachings, and you sit down and you don't get what you expect out of the conversation, you're going to get irritated and frustrated, and this whole thing's going to backfire on you. So it's better to make sure that your mind is really peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy before you actually go in and start sharing the teachings with anybody that you have compassion for in any of these types of relationships, friends, colleagues, or relatives.
Right, okay. So he's acknowledging that unless we're fully enlightened, we might not be having compassion all the time for all beings. And that if it's not there, then best not to go forth with exhorting them in the Four Noble Truths.
Right,
it's
because
not coming from a place.
Right, because if you don't have compassion for somebody, that means you don't have any concern for their misfortune. So why would you even go share the teachings with them? But in order to get to enlightenment, you're going to need to have compassion for all beings. So you need to at least have compassion for the person that you're going to spend this time, effort, and energy with to expose them to the Four Noble Truths. And I'm adding that extra piece that you should be sure that you don't have craving, desire, attachment in the relationship.
Okay, perhaps we can go to Amina next, because she asked a question on Facebook about chapter 2.
Okay.
So chapter 2 is one who points out the treasure. And Amina's question is, what is the Buddha referring to with the sound core? What is this sound core?
Okay, let me find that. Oh, okay. So the sound core will stand the test. Okay. So what this is essentially this Dhamma that he's talking about is he's talking about a teacher who points out areas for you to improve is a teacher that you should stick with. So if the teacher is always saying, oh, you're so great, you're so wonderful, you're outstanding, you're fine, oh, you're doing so great. Well, that's fine, but what are the things I need to work on? What are the things I need to improve? So what he's saying here in the overall Dhamma is that if there's a teacher who's saying, hey, you really need to improve this, or you need to look at this, or here's some area for growth, or hey, you maybe need to think about this in a different way. He's saying this is the kind of sage, or this is the kind of teacher that you should stick with. Because if you stick with this kind of teacher that's willing to point out your deficiencies or areas to grow, then things only get better. They don't get worse, right? So what he's saying in the first part is he's saying that this sound core is like someone who's dedicated to stand the test of time. Like this way of approach is going to be a more steady, more consistent, more dedicated approach to learning and practicing. Whereas if the Buddha just sat there and just told you all the good things all the time, and here he's talking about treating you like a potter treats a raw, damp clay, where he's just constantly trying to mold you, right? You don't want a teacher like that either. You would like somebody who guides you, somebody who gives you guidance, somebody who's helping you see the areas for growth, but you don't want someone to be over correcting you either, which is that first part is like, I'm not going to treat you like a potter treats a raw, damp clay, where he's constantly trying to mold you, repeatedly restraining you. Like he's not going to keep pulling you back. He's not going to be attached to you, and every time he sees you get ready to step in the fire, pull you back. He's going to let you get close to the fire so you can feel the heat, right? So the Buddha's not going to constantly restrain you, and a good teacher wouldn't do that. Sometimes you got to let your students feel the heat. What he's saying here is, I shall speak to you, Ananda. Ananda is his closest student, by the way, who was with him the whole time until he died. I will speak to you, Ananda, repeatedly admonishing you. So he's going to tell him all the things that the Buddha sees that you need to improve. I'm going to tell you all of them, right? He's not going to hold back. He's going to tell you what he sees. I shall speak to you, Ananda. And then the sound core will stand the test, meaning this dedicated, consistent approach of gradually telling you what it is that you need to improve. That's going to stand the real test, because the test is life itself. Life is constantly testing you, and life's going to test your mind in lots of different ways. So by repeatedly having your teacher help you to see what it is you need to improve, and you taking a dedicated, consistent approach to it, this is going to stand the test of time in this test of the world as the world tests you. And the Buddha is essentially giving you guidance on how to pick out a good teacher. A good teacher is someone who's going to tell you your faults, someone who's going to tell you where to grow, someone who's going to show you areas that you need improvement. Because as this teacher does that and you work on them to improve it, things will get better, not worse. And a good teacher is not someone who's constantly trying to mold you, but gives you free rein to make your own decisions. They're not constantly restraining you and pulling you back, but they're letting you think and decide for yourself.
Okay, perhaps we can go to the next chapter, seeing as I had a question about this one.
Okay, chapter 3.
Right after. Yeah, so by chance that the Tathagata arises in the world.
Yeah, I love this particular. I like all the Buddhist teachings. I think they're profound. They're very illuminating. But this particular one is one that really sticks with me. Did you have a specific question, or did you want to review the whole chapter, Max?
I think it'd be useful for everybody probably if we looked at the whole chapter.
Okay, so let's talk about this. This one is talking essentially about helping you to see the greatness of being born into the human world. Okay, what he's talking about here is a yoke. A yoke is like a circle, like a small little hoop. And what he's saying is, imagine that the entire earth is flooded. The entire earth becomes one mass of water. So imagine the entire globe, the entire earth, as an entirely flooded. And somebody takes this small yoke, like a small circle, and tosses it on the surface of the water. And now the wind blows it around, right? To the east, to the west, to the north, to the south. And there's this blind sea turtle at the bottom of the water, somewhere in the earth, deep down under the water. And this turtle comes up to the surface of the water once every 100 years to get some air. And what the Buddha is saying is, with this small little yoke floating on the surface of the entire globe and being blown all around constantly, and this turtle comes up once every 100 years to get some air, he's saying, what do you think the chances are that this turtle is going to insert its neck into this circle, to this yoke? And he asked his students, what do you think? Would that blind sea turtle coming to the surface once every 100 years insert its neck into that yoke with a single hole? Because remember, the whole entire earth is flooded. And there's this one small little circle floating around the entire surface. And only once every 100 years is this turtle coming up for air. And his students say, it would be by chance, Venerable Sir, that the blind turtle coming to the surface once every 100 years would insert its neck into that yoke with a single hole. So then once the Buddha asked a question, now he's looking for a response, right? So the students reply to him, and now the Buddha delivers the actual teaching. He says, so too, it is by chance that one obtains the human state. So that's how rare it is that you've become human. Just as rare as it is once every 100 years for that turtle to come up to the surface of the air, or the surface of the water for air, and insert its neck into the circle, that's how rare it is that you now have this human life. So essentially, treasure this human life that you've gotten, that you've worked towards in your previous lives, and you've built up your karma to this point where you've got a human life. He's saying treasure this human state, essentially. So he says, it's wonderful that you've got this human state. And it's also by chance that a Tathagata, an Arahant, a perfectly enlightened one, arises in the world. So for a Buddha to actually arise in the world is extremely rare. The last one was 2,500 years ago. And not only did those people attain the human state, but they attained the human state while there was a Buddha in existence. And that's the most ideal time to actually attain enlightenment, when there's a Buddha in existence. So the likelihood of being human and a Buddha arising in the world is extremely rare. And then he goes on and he says, by chance that the Dhamma and discipline, the teachings and the discipline, proclaimed by the Buddha, the Tathagata, shines in the world. Because when a Buddha comes into the world, they're going to share the teachings in a way that's more profound than any other teacher that may be existing or has existed. Because a Buddha attained enlightenment on their own, so they have deep, profound wisdom of what it takes to actually attain enlightenment. And by a Buddha teaching in the world, the Dhamma, or the teachings to attain enlightenment, are going to shine in the world. So for these things to have happened during your lifetime, it's extremely rare. So what he's saying here then in that second paragraph is, you have obtained that human state, bhikkhus. As rare as that is, you've obtained it. A Tathagata and an Arahant, a perfectly enlightened one, has arisen in the world. The Dhamma and discipline proclaimed by the Tathagata shines in the world. So they're living at a very unique time in history. They got a human existence, they've got a Buddha, and the teachings are shining in the world. So now he's saying to them, therefore, bhikkhus, an exertion should be made. So you should apply effort, you should apply energy to understand. And then he goes into the Four Noble Truths. You should understand, you should take time, effort, and energy to understand this is discontentedness. An exertion should be made to understand this is the cause of discontentedness. An exertion should be made to understand this is the cessation of discontentedness. An exertion should be made to understand this is the way leading to the cessation of discontentedness. You're going to see the Buddha coming back to the Four Noble Truths again and again and again and again throughout his teachings, because it's the Four Noble Truths that establishes right view. Without right view, there's no chance for a practitioner to attain enlightenment. You have to establish right view. So constantly, over and over and over again, he keeps coming back to right view in the Four Noble Truths. So he's sharing with his students, now that you've got this human life, now that there's a Buddha here, now that the Dhamma is shining in the world, this is your time to learn the Four Noble Truths and get to enlightenment.
Okay, thanks, David. So my first question here was really about this word chance, because we know it's karma, right? That one becomes a human or becomes anything at all. It's really the results of one's own decisions. So does he really mean it's by chance? Is that how he means that here?
He's talking about how rare it is. So he's saying, so too, bhikkhus,
Nice.
it is so rare that one obtains the human state. It is so rare that a Tathagata and an Arahant, a perfectly enlightened one, arises in the world. It is so rare that the Dhamma, the discipline proclaimed by the Tathagata, shines in the world.
Okay. Do you think he meant that literally, that it really is as rare as a turtle putting his head through a hole on an earth filled with water? It's literally as rare as that.
Yes, because he's going to use stories, because these stories can be imprinted into the mind. One of the best ways to teach as a teacher is to tell stories. Students will remember stories before they will remember pure information. So if you can put a story around a teaching, then a student is much more aptly and readily able to remember your teachings if you can attach it to a story.
Right. Because that would be like ultra rare for a turtle to put its head through a yoke.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So.
And one of the things, I'll add something to this that is not really well known, but it's connected to this Dhamma. If you see statues or artwork of the Buddha, he will oftentimes have his hand like this. Okay? What he's doing here is he's symbolizing the yoke. Okay? Mm-hmm. This circle, if you see a statue or artwork with his hand like this, he's using this circle of his index finger and his thumb to symbolize this yoke, to remind you how rare your human life is, how rare it is that a Buddha has arisen in the world, and how rare it is that the Dhamma is going to shine in the world. And then these three fingers are representing the three lower realms. The hell realm is the pinky, the afflicted spirits realm is the ring finger, and the animal realm is the middle finger. The human realm is the index finger, and the heavenly realm is the thumb. And the length of the finger is how many beings are in that realm. So if you look at your hand, most beings are in the animal realm. That's why our middle finger is the longest. The least amount of beings are in hell and in the heavenly realm. That's why our pinky and our thumb are smaller. The afflicted spirits realm and the human realm have the second most in comparison to the animal realm. So what he's doing here when he makes this circle is he's taking the human realm and the heavenly realm, making a circle, because this is the realms that you can attain enlightenment in. And then he's showing you the three lower realms that you can potentially be reborn back into if you don't attain enlightenment during this existence. So this one hand gesture, if you understand this Dhamma and you understand the 5 realms of existence with just one hand gesture, boom, you've just taken in and remembered a whole lot of teachings. And this is one of the ways the Buddha would teach, is with hand gestures.
Very interesting, and a lot of agreement in the chat actually from Manal and Michael saying very interesting. Yeah, so, and Judith. So thank you guys. And just one more question there, David. It seems like as rare as it may be for one to attain the human state, it seems even rarer by virtue of that a Tathagata would arise. Because for every time Buddha arises, there's probably billions and billions and billions of other humans come into existence. So
yes, that's like right. It's extremely rare.
Even rarer maybe than the turtle, similarly.
Yeah, I mean, just getting to the human realm is quite rare. Just to be human and get to the human realm. But to get to the human realm when there's a Buddha, which means if there's a Buddha in existence, the Dhamma is going to be shining in the world. So it's rare enough just to become human, but to be born at a time when there's a real living, breathing Buddha in existence, this is the ideal time for everyone to attain enlightenment, when a Buddha is in existence.
Okay, thank you for that. I can see that Alan's hand is up, so let's go to you next, Alan.
Hello, everybody. I had a question on chapter 21.
Sure.
That's seeing non-self with correct wisdom. And I'm okay with the first paragraph, which is just stating that the 5 aggregates of form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness are impermanent. And then at the beginning of the second paragraph, it says, what is impermanent is suffering, which I'm okay with that. But then it says, what is suffering is non-self. And I'm struggling to bridge the gap a little bit on that sentence.
Okay. We're in the second paragraph here, Alan?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It's the second sentence, second paragraph.
Okay. So I've got the second paragraph starts out with, what is impermanent is discontentedness. What is discontentedness is non-self. So that sentence is the one you're having trouble with, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I feel there's a missing word here that should be inserted into this Dhamma. What it should say is, what is impermanent, so what is clinging, when the mind is clinging to things that are impermanent, is going to create discontentedness. When the mind is clinging to the self, it's going to create discontentedness. That's what essentially is being said here. So remember that these teachings have been through 2,500 years of impermanence. So what we're looking at here is what we've got based on this 2,500 years of impermanence. So I feel there's some missing words here that would help to more fully illuminate this, because I know that the mind, if it's clinging to things that are impermanent, which is everything's impermanent, then it's going to experience discontentedness. And when the mind is clinging to the self, then that's going to create discontentedness. I feel that's what this is trying to say. And then that third sentence is, what is non-self should be seen as it really is with correct wisdom. Thus, this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. So he's kind of giving some guidance on separating and disassociating with all of these material possessions and relationships and everything else, and saying, this isn't mine, this isn't who I am, this is not myself, and training the mind to disassociate with all of these impermanent things. And this is one of the ways to realize non-self, is to train the mind in that way.
Good, thank you.
Yep. One of the things that you guys are going to see as we go through this is, we're working with 2,500-year-old teachings. We're working with translations. We're working with trying to understand teachings that have been around for a long time. So sometimes what it's going to take in order for me to help you understand this is to get away from the actual individual specific words and kind of extrapolate what the real meaning is here. So that this is a perfect example of that, where we've got what is discontentedness is non-self, but that I can understand why Alan and maybe others were having challenges to understand what that means, because I don't really see that as 100% accurate in the way that it's being explained there. And that could be a function of the translation. It could be a function of some words were lost along the 2,500 year journey, because the way that these teachings were captured originally is people went out into the forest, they dried out palm leaves, and on these dried palm leaves, they created ink and they wrote out the teachings with ink. And then as the palm leaves dried and started to deteriorate, they basically dried out a bunch more palm leaves and copied the words from one palm leaf to the other palm leaf. And if there's anything you know about ink and palm leaves is, if a little bit of the palm leaf turns a little bit gray or a little bit black, it could change one character to another character, and it could completely change what the Buddha was actually teaching during his lifetime. And this is one of the struggles that people have right now in attaining enlightenment, is that even though we have these certain words in the Pali Canon, we know because of 2,500 years of impermanence that it's impossible for this to be exactly what the Buddha taught. So that's why you need a teacher to help you understand, based on their practical experience, what is really being shared here, because this most likely isn't exactly what he taught. It's some level removed from that because of the degrading of the palm leaves and the degrading of books and translations and everything else along the way. So that's why practical experience always trumps the scriptures, and just looking at pure scriptures. You have to take the actual text and put it into practice so that you can see the truth for yourself. And because of where I am in my practice, that's why I can say that when I look at this particular paragraph and sentences, that there's some missing words here, because it's really not explaining what you will experience in real life. What is really being shared here is through clinging or craving or being attached to things that are impermanent, it will cause discontentedness. And by craving or being attached or clinging to the self, it will cause discontentedness. And then the Buddha goes on and says, in order to realized non-self, it needs to be seen with correct wisdom that this is not mine. This is not, this I am not. This is not myself. So that's a better explanation of what it is that is being shared in this paragraph.
We have a follow-up from Michael on this one. He asks, what is the difference between perception, volitional formations, and consciousness? What are they?
Okay, this is a good time to talk about these because you'll see this in the Four Noble Truths as well. This is what's called the five aggregates. I don't typically teach the five aggregates, especially in the book that I wrote, because it's a bit more of a challenging teaching and you don't necessarily need it in order to attain enlightenment. But since we're further along on the path now with this particular class, let's describe what the five aggregates are and how they come into play. So what the Buddha is describing here is what we call the five aggregates. This is what makes a living being. So if a being has form, then that's a being. That's one component of being a being. There's five aggregates in order to be a being. There has to be physical form. So human beings have physical form and animals have physical form. So we consider these a living being, where beings in the heavenly realm, afflicted spirits realm, and hell realm, these are formless beings, right? They don't have form. Okay, so this form is impermanent. This physical form is impermanent. Feelings, this is discontentedness, right? Sadness, anger, frustration, irritation, happiness, excitement, elation, boredom, loneliness. Feelings are impermanent. Perceptions is how you perceive something, right? Let's just say you weren't on this path and you saw somebody walk down the street with tattoos and you perceive that everybody having tattoos is a bad person, or everyone wearing tattoos is a good person, right? And you saw that, then that's a perception. You're viewing something through your perception, and it's not typically accurate. So perceptions are impermanent. You need to change your perceptions of things. Volitional formations are how the mind makes decisions and looks to the future, and it tries to sort out the future and makes certain decisions about the future. And then consciousness is the actual mind itself. So the actual mind or consciousness, awareness of mind, that's the consciousness, having an actual consciousness, where like a plant, like a tree has physical form. Some people say they have feelings, but that's debatable. A tree doesn't have perceptions where it's looking at another tree and saying that tree's good or that tree's not good. A tree is not thinking about the future and, wow, there's all this space, maybe I'll grow this way or I'll grow that way. And a tree's doesn't have a consciousness or a mind. So a tree doesn't have the five aggregates, but human beings and an animal does have the five aggregates. This is a living being. And you'll see this here, you'll see it in other parts of his teachings as well, namely the Four Noble Truths. So whenever you see form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, this is the five aggregates.
I have a question as well here, David, about this second paragraph, how he ends this. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. Do you think there's some significance to these three different statements here? And what are the differences between these three?
I summarize this as just disassociating with any of this impermanent stuff, right? Because he talks before this about essentially what makes up a human being, the form, the feeling, our perceptions, our looking to the future to make decisions, the mind itself, right? So this physical body is impermanent, this mind is impermanent, the feelings in the mind are impermanent, the perceptions in the mind are impermanent, the decisions that we're trying to make for the future are all impermanent. And now what he's saying is hey, all of this impermanence is going to lead to discontentedness. The longer you try to hold on to this form, feeling, perception, relational formations, and consciousness, the more discontent you're going to be. What you really need to do is you really need to realize non-self and see it for what it is, that none of this belongs to you. This form, this feeling, this perception, relational formations, and consciousness, this isn't you. This isn't who you are. It's not mine. I am not, right? I am not this. This I am not. And this is not myself. So just completely disassociating with this and realizing non-self. Why he chose those particular words in that order, it's just his way of sharing in his word choice. But I would summarize this as saying, disassociate everything that you think is yours and belongs to you, whether it's the body or the mind or the feelings, the perceptions, the relational formations, even your children, your spouse, your life partner, your house, your car, your clothes. Just train the mind to think that none of these things belong to you. It's not yours. And this will help you to let go and get closer and closer to non-self.
Right, so there's absolutely nothing in any of these aggregates that can be taken as a self. So we could take, for example, perceptions. These are not my perceptions. I am not these perceptions and they are not me, I guess is how you could apply that. And the same applies for all 5 of these aggregates, right?
Right, because remember, the problem is that the unenlightened mind falsely identifies all of these things as being the self. The unenlightened mind thinks that there is a permanent self. And if you ask somebody, okay, point to John or point to Rebecca, where is Rebecca? People are going to point to the physical body. Well, the physical body is impermanent. How can that be the permanent self? Or some people, you say, where is David? They may point to the mind. Well, we would all agree that the consciousness is impermanent. So if the physical form of the physical body is impermanent and the mind is impermanent, where is this permanent self that the unenlightened mind thinks that exists? It's not there. And that's what the Buddha is saying in these 2 paragraphs is none of these aggregates are permanent, therefore there is no self. And the sooner that you come to realize that and train the mind to let go of that, the better.
We have a question from Michael. Unenlightened mind means unenlightened consciousness, right?
That's correct. A consciousness and the mind are the same thing. A consciousness is just a little bit fancier way to say the mind.
Could we also consider feelings, perception, and volition as part of the mind?
Yes, those are in the mind. So the feelings, perceptions, and relational formations are in the consciousness or in the mind. But they're still impermanent because they arise and then they cease to exist. And they're still not the self. They're still not part of the self, which is what this particular Dhamma teaching is all about, is seeing non-self and understanding that there is no self.
Okay, right. So they arise in the mind, in the consciousness, but they are not the mind, and the mind is not me. In fact, none of it is self. I think we've probably got to the bottom of that.
You got that exactly correct, Max.
Okay, all right. Michael also asks, is volitional formation the will or a thought? I read that once, just want clarification.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate around exactly what, volitional formations are. Different people will say different things. Honestly, I don't feel that it really matters a whole lot, because the idea is that we got to train this mind to come into the present moment. But what I think of volitional formations is I think of it as future thoughts, forming decisions about the future. But other people will have a different slant on that. But it really doesn't matter, because the idea is to understand that none of this is you. They're not permanent. The choices that you make, the decisions that you make, whether now or in the future, they're not permanent and they're not you. They're not who you are.
Okay, that's the end of our questions on chapter 21. We have a question from Michelle on chapter 19.
Okay, go to chapter 19.
This is the simile of a man were wounded by an arrow thickly smeared with poison.
Yeah, this is another one of my favorite ones. I really like this one.
Okay, so Michelle just says she's not sure what the lesson is in chapter 19, so perhaps we can run through this one.
Yeah, this is a great Dhamma teaching here. So the Buddha here, the chapter 19, the title is Simile of a Man Were Wounded by an Arrow Thickly Smeared with Poison. And the way this story goes is he talks about a person who's in the forest and gets hit with a poisonous arrow. And when this arrow penetrates the person's body with poison, the people who are around this guy that got hit with the arrow, they run off and they go get a surgeon. And they bring the surgeon to the person, and the surgeon's ready to take the arrow out, and they're ready to take the poison out of the body. And the person who's wounded says, no. Before you take out this arrow, there's some questions that I need answered before you actually take out this poison, this arrow. And they're like, okay, well, what do you need to know? So he says, I need to know the man who wounded me. Was he tall, short, or middle height? The guy that wounded me, was he dark, brown, or golden skin? Was the bow, was the string that wounded me, was it made out of fiber, reed, sinew, hemp, or bark? He goes on with all these different things. He talks about the shaft of the arrow. Was it made out of a wild substance, or was it a cultivated substance like a plant? And he talks about the feathers on the arrow. Was it made by, what type of animal was it made by? What kind of feathers? Was it a vulture, a heron, a hawk, a peacock, a stork, right? And then he goes on and he talks about what kind of sinew was the shaft that wounded me. Was it bound with an ox or a buffalo or a deer or a monkey? A sinew is like a string, right? And he says, until I know what kind of arrowhead that wounded me, was it spiked or razor tipped or curved or barbed or calf tooth or lancet shaped? He's asking all these questions. He doesn't want the surgeon to even touch or try to remove this poisonous arrow until he gets the answer to all these different questions, right? And the Buddha says, if this was actually happening, surely this man would die before the arrow would be taken out and before the poison would come out, because there's just no way that you can get all the answers to all those questions in enough time for the arrow and the poison to come out before you die. So the Buddha uses this story to then talk about how some people, when they're trying to learn with him or they're thinking about learning with him, they sit down with him and they want to know all the answers to all the questions. They want to know all the answers to all the questions before they actually start practicing the teachings. So I want to know this, and 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 tell me about this, and what happens at this point, and this point, and this point, and tell me all the answers to all these questions. And then once you answer all these questions for me, then I will learn your teachings, and then I will practice your teachings to attain enlightenment. And the Buddha says if you take this approach, that surely you will die before all the poison is taken out. Because the poison that he's referring to is the three poisons: craving, anger, and ignorance, greed, hatred, and delusion. The three poisons, or the three unwholesome roots, the three fires. And he's saying you've essentially got this job that he's the surgeon. The Buddha and his teachings are the surgeon, and they can take this poison out of the mind. But if you want all the answers to all of the questions that exist, before you actually start learning and practicing, you will die before you ever remove any of the poison and essentially attain enlightenment. Which means if you don't attain enlightenment and you die, you're going to be reborn into one of the lower realms. So therefore, you're not going to attain enlightenment. And it's going to be countless lives before you actually get back to the human realm again. So now that there's a Buddha in existence, and now that you've got this human life, and now that the Dhamma is shining in the world, use the surgeon, use the tools of the teachings to get rid of this poison so that you don't die. Don't sit and ask a gazillion questions over multiple weeks and months and years, thinking that once you get the answer to all those things, then you're going to actually start practicing the teachings. You've actually got to learn a little bit, practice a little bit. Learn a little bit, practice a little bit. Learn a little bit, practice a little bit. And by doing that, the mind becomes wiser and wiser, and you can see the truth for yourself that the condition of the mind is gradually improving. But if you sit back and ask years and years worth of questions before you actually make any attempt to practice, you're going to die before you attain enlightenment. And that would be unfortunate, because then you're going to be reborn into one of the lower realms. And then at the very end, he talks about his undeclared teachings, because some of the obscure questions that people will often ask of a certain teacher before they will actually learn and practice the teachings are things like, is the world eternal? Is the world not eternal? Is the world finite, or is the world infinite? Is the soul the same thing as the body, or is the soul one thing and the body is another? After death, is a Tathagata exist? Or after death, a Tathagata does not exist? After death, the Tathagata both exist and does not exist. After death, the Tathagata neither exists nor does not exist. So the Buddha is saying, I left all of this as undeclared. He's not declaring what is the situation or what is the truth on these topics. And you can replace the word Tathagata here, because he's referring to himself, as enlightened being. So what he's saying is, after death, an enlightened being either exists, does not exist, both exists and does not exist, or after death neither exists nor does not exist. So he's leaving that as an undeclared teaching. Once you attain enlightenment, what happens next? But the vast majority of the world will tell you that once you attain enlightenment and die, then you no longer exist. But right here, you can see the Buddha didn't teach that. It's an undeclared teaching. And then he goes on, after he talks about what he didn't declare, what he left as undeclared, he says, what have I declared? And then he comes back to the Four Noble Truths, because the Four Noble Truths is so important. He's saying, what I declared is, this is discontentedness. This is the cause of discontentedness. This is the cessation of discontentedness. This is the way leading to the cessation of discontentedness. I have declared. So he's declaring in his entire path of how to eliminate discontentedness and what is that path. And then he sums it up with saying, why have I declared that? Because it is beneficial. It belongs to the fundamentals of the holy life. It leads to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana. That is why I declared it. So he's declared the Four Noble Truths. That's what a Buddha does, is they're going to declare teachings and say, this is what it takes to attain enlightenment. And he declared these Four Noble Truths along with all the other teachings. And why did he do that? Well, because it leads to enlightenment. It leads to peace. And that's why he declared it.
So there's clearly a practical utility in this, David, in that he declared what works and what actually eliminates discontentedness from the mind. And what he's not looking to do is explain the universe and existence in any other way. But would the Buddha have known the answers to these undeclared teachings and just decided not to teach them out of compassion and out of wanting to help the man who's been struck by the arrow, to use the simile, or would he actually have not been able to know these answers in his human existence?
It could be either or. The Buddha could have either known it and chosen not to teach it because it doesn't lead to enlightenment. Because if you know the answer to any of those questions, it's not going to make you any more enlightened. Or he might not have known it and he just chose not to, he didn't have the knowledge to be able to teach it. But as a teacher, I can tell you that oftentimes students are going to ask questions on all different kinds of things. And a wise teacher can say very clearly, you don't need to know the answer to that. There's nothing in that question that's going to lead to your enlightenment. And it's oftentimes better, even if the teacher knows the answer, sometimes it's better to not answer it and either let the student find out on their own, because they will as part of this path, or if they did know the answer to that, it might actually hinder them, right? If let's just say that after you get enlightenment, there is some glorious place that you go to after you die. Let's just say, okay, I'm not saying it as true. I'm just saying, let's just say it exists. Well, that's just one more thing for the unenlightened mind to crave, isn't it? That's just one more thing. And there's a massive amount of craving, desire, attachment for the unenlightened mind to get rid of. And that's challenging enough to get to this enlightened mind to eliminate all those craving, desire, attachments. Well, if the Buddha knew that there's some glorious place that everybody goes to after they attain enlightenment, why would he even share that? Because it's just one more thing for the mind to latch onto and crave and to need to get rid of. So in that particular case, if the Buddha did know of this, but I'm not saying it exists, I'm just saying if it did and the Buddha knew about it, he's very wise to not teach it, because out of compassion for his students, don't give them one more thing to latch onto and crave, because the whole goal is to eliminate this craving, desire, attachment. The goal is to get them to enlightenment. So the answers to these questions that he left as undeclared are, in my view, a way of saying you don't need to know any of these things to attain enlightenment. Because if you look at some of the other Dhamma in here, where he's talking about the leaves of the tree that he picks up, I think it's in these first 25 chapters, where he's walking through the forest and he picks up some leaves and he asks the monks, he says, out of all these leaves that I just picked up in my hand, what is more, the few leaves in my hand or all of the leaves and all of the trees above my head? And the students say, well, of course, all the leaves and all of the trees above your head are much more than the few leaves that you have in your hand. And he said, so too is the wisdom that I understand as part of my self-awakening. All the leaves and all the trees above my head represent all of the wisdom that I acquired in this journey to become a Buddha. The few leaves that I picked up in my hand represent the wisdom that you need in order to attain enlightenment. So all I'm going to teach you is the few leaves that are in my hand. So if I teach you just these few little leaves that are in my hand, then you will be able to awaken the mind to enlightenment. And you'll also be able to see more of the forest. You won't be able to see the entire forest because only a Buddha has the deep enough wisdom to see all the leaves and all of the trees. But by learning just these few little leaves in his hands to awaken your mind, now with that awakening and that wisdom, you'll be able to see more of the forest. So here, the Buddha not declaring these is out of compassion to the students and just focusing them only on what it is that is needed to attain enlightenment, and not all these other erroneous questions that don't have anything to do with enlightenment. So let's just say like the world is eternal, because that's one of the things that he taught, or that he left undeclared. He left undeclared that the world is eternal. So let's just say the world is eternal. So what? How does that help you train your mind right now to attain enlightenment and bring it into the present moment? Or let's just say the world is not eternal. So what? It's going to end someday, right? It's either going to last forever or it's going to end someday, right? So what, right? It doesn't matter, because the goal is that right now in this present moment, your mind is discontent, your mind is unenlightened, you need to train it. What's going on with the world, whether it's eternal or not eternal, it doesn't matter. And the same thing with all these other questions, whether it's finite or infinite, whether the soul is this or that, what happens to you after death once you've attained enlightenment, so what? None of that stuff is going to help you in the here and now, in this moment, to actually train the mind to attain enlightenment. And what he ends with, right? Sorry, Max. What he ends with is essentially, what have I declared? The Four Noble Truths. That's what's going to help you. It's the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and the Five Precepts and the Three Poisons and the Natural Law of Karma and how to meditate and all of these other things. That's what's going to lead to enlightenment. So why did I declare it? Because it's beneficial. Because it leads to enlightenment, to Nibbana.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. Well, it appears we have no more questions about these first 25 chapters.
Okay. So we just had a short little time to kind of study these teachings a bit today. And I'm kind of feeling out what's the best way to kind of share these and teach these to you guys, because I've learned these and I've practiced them and I understand them really, really well. So I'm trying to kind of feel out what's the best way to really teach these to you guys over the internet. So we're going to kind of do that over the next couple of sessions. And I think the way that I've laid out will probably work best, but we'll see how it goes, and we can always kind of adjust as we go. But the idea is that this week leading up to next Saturday, that you read this particular chapters, chapter 26 and chapter 51, or through 51. So chapter 26 through 51, you can be reading this week, so that next Saturday, then we can have a discussion about the various aspects of those chapters that you're not understanding, or that you need help with, or that you would like clarification on, or that you would like to confirm what it is that you actually read and you feel like you have a certain understanding, and you would just like to confirm that with me, that you're understanding it correctly. So we'll do that for chapters 26 through 51 next Saturday. And we'll start off with meditation for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll go right into studying. So we'll have lots more time, almost double the amount of time that we had today to actually study these. Tomorrow in the group learning program, we're going to be studying chapter 23, which is Symbolism in the Teachings, Reminders Through Imagery. So if you're taking both this Pali Canon and English study group and the group learning program, you can join tomorrow at the same time to study chapter 23 in this book. And you can download this book online for free. Because I wrote it, I can offer it completely free and downloadable. If you like a printed copy, there's a way to actually get that as well. And we're going to be essentially over the next couple of weeks finishing up that group learning program and adding some additional classes at the end of that program that aren't actually advertised right now, to further help you expand your wisdom and knowledge around the Buddhist teachings. So that's going to be happening tomorrow, is chapter 23. And then on Wednesday, we're going to be doing breathing mindfulness meditation and diving into actually practicing meditation. On Saturday next week, we're going to be studying these particular teachings of chapter 26 through 51. And then Max would like to invite you guys next Sunday, the 17th of January, to come at 8 o'clock. If you would like to come to class a little bit early next Sunday, not tomorrow, but next Sunday, Max is going to be hosting an interest meeting where if you're interested in learning how to be a moderator for these online classes, you'll be able to join at 8 o'clock rather than 9 o'clock Thai time. And Max and some other students are going to be talking about what is a moderator and what kind of things that they actually do. I might maybe just give Max a few moments to kind of talk about what he's actually going to be teaching on that day. So if any of you guys would like to join at 8 o'clock next Sunday, you'll know what he's actually teaching. So Max, if you would like to share that, I'm sure people would appreciate it.
Sure, yeah. So as this program grows and we're offering more and more classes, it's going to be very helpful for everybody, I think, that we train up our next round of moderators to do what I do each class, essentially. And so this class next Sunday, the 17th, is really just an interest meeting for anyone who might be interested to learn how to do the moderation. There's no obligation or anything. It's just a great opportunity, I found, to get close to the teaching, so it's good for one's own practice. It is also a way to practice generosity because you're giving back to the community and helping support the teachings. So in addition, it can also help you develop certain skills like speaking skills and eliminate shyness of speaking in a live class. So many benefits all round. And if that sounds like something you might be interested in, by all means come along. All are welcome. We're going to start an hour before the regular class. And like I said, there's no requirement to moderate a certain number of classes or to do anything. You can just take the lessons away and apply them in daily life. There's absolutely no expectations or anything like that. But it's just an initial meeting to understand a bit more about what a moderator does, the responsibilities of a moderator, and then anyone who's interested to actually learn more will be running further classes where we actually get into the nitty-gritty of how to actually do moderation. So that's all for me on that, David.
Okay. So Max has done an outstanding job with moderating these classes, and he just really is a real natural at actually moderating. And I think he makes these classes, the YouTube video, the Facebook videos, the podcast, just makes it so much better by having these skills and this natural ability to moderate these classes. So now, because of that skill and ability that he's developed, he's offering an opportunity for all of you to actually learn what he does, so that if you have an interest to learn those skills, then it will help you in your practice. Because part of moderating, he has to have a certain amount of concentration and a certain amount of clarity of mind. He needs to be able to speak in a certain way. And all of these things are a part of the path. And then, as he mentioned, the generosity and the loving kindness and compassion, all of these things help him in his practice by actually moderating. So if it's something that you would like to give a try, or you would like to just hear more about it, that meeting next Sunday on the 17th at 8 o'clock Thai time is for anybody who just has a potential interest. You can hear more about what Max does and learn a bit about how he does his moderation. And whether you actually choose to moderate these classes or not is yet to be determined. It's up to you. But if you would like to just learn some of the skills that he's developed and that he employs, he's willing to share those skills with you as part of this class next Sunday at 8 o'clock. So you're invited to that, and all you've got to do is just log in just 1 hour earlier to Zoom, because it's only going to be in Zoom. It's not going to be live streamed out to Facebook or YouTube. It's just going to be on Zoom. So you're welcome to log in a bit earlier for that next Sunday. So I would like to just thank all of you guys for joining us on this very first class of sharing these books over the internet. Now that we're all in the COVID lockdown or quarantine, it's kind of nice to connect with each other a few times a week and study things together. So while you're at home studying these books by yourself, it's kind of nice to know that there's a bunch of other people all over the world studying these same books right along with you. And you've got this ability to connect into a teacher, either here live in class or personally by private message or personal guidance through scheduling an appointment. You can actually reach out and get help. So even though you're in your home and you may not be going outside as much because of COVID, you can still be very active, because now online we can be in each other's living room with just a couple of clicks. And that's kind of really nice to be able to reach out to people in the world. And I know it's not human contact, it's not actually touching people, but you can learn a lot during COVID now that you're inside. And think about it as that seclusion, right? The Buddha talked about being secluded. He went off into the forest and for 4 years, but a total of 6 years, was in the forest all by himself. Well, okay, maybe that's kind of what you've got going on here with COVID. You're in your house somewhat secluded, which is actually helpful according to the Buddha. And according to me, I would say that it's actually quite helpful to be secluded, that it will actually help you to learn and practice these teachings and refine the mind and train the mind. So see it as a positive. See it as something that's actually benefiting you. And think about all the other people around the world that are studying right alongside of you. So thank you for joining. I'll see you either Sunday, Wednesday, or Saturday. And until then, have a very wonderful rest of your day. Continue to meditate, continue to learn, and we'll see you next time. Sawadee khap. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.